1,400 species of bat, and there's only one species of human.
Mm.
And so what you've got is this enormous variation in just a single protein across all of these different species within that clave. And humans, we have a little bit of variation around our proteins, but nothing in comparison to those.
Mm.
And not surprisingly, when you've got virus populations sitting in that huge variability, the jump to a human is quite predictable. And so all a human needs is to have a set of binding sites that are more attractive, and away we go.
Yes.
So I've kind of worked my way through that ACE tropism, and I'm now on the viral tropism, which is equally fascinating in terms of where that is.
Brilliant.
And
well, not brilliant, but yes, it's good.
Yeah. And there's something that's really struck me, which you don't get from looking in a traditional academic discipline way, and it's the following. If you said to yourself, what is the single most powerful thing that the virus has? It's nothing more than a surface, and that's all it's got. It's the ability to constantly change an incredibly small amount of its surface, makes it the most potent entity at the moment in the planet. And because it's that surface that is responsible for the binding. And you're talking about a couple of hundred amino acids, that's all.
Yeah.
And so it's just binding. It's a difference in the binding of, it comes down to fundamental architecture.
Yeah.
Would you, Richard, because I'm just heavily into this chapter.
Yep.
And I've been collecting up all the sites of production of angiotensin II that occur with lip inflammation.
Yeah.
And dendritic cells right through to helper cells.
Yep.
All have renin angiotensin systems.
Yep.
It's really quite, so as you get an inflammatory reaction, the angiotensin II builds up. As these guys come in, thinking they're the only guys making the reactive oxygen species, I think. That's why they. But would you suggest that the whole nastiness of the virus is due to loss of ACE2? What I'm trying to get at.
It's a very good question. I think it's. I think the answer is yes, and I think it's in the following way, that I think COVID is actually fundamentally two diseases. It's an initial disease of the upper respiratory tract, and then it's a subsequent disease of the lower respiratory tract, of which angiotensin is a dominant player in both.
I guess my argument against that is there's not much. The integrity of the nasal epithelium is more robust and must have a higher level of innate immunity than the lung parenchyma. And is that simply the factor of it, once it's got to the lung, is really crook? Or is it because we have a high innate immunity in our nasal passages because we've been playing with coronaviruses and the common cold for.
I think it's a terrific question. It's really it's what it's all about. If you look at MERS and SARS-CoV-1, they're effectively lower respiratory tract infections. There's very, very little upper, and that's why they don't spread. In other words, they're lethal, but not highly infective, because they go straight to the lower. If you look at SARS-CoV-2 and said it's either a variant of one or it's arrived, it's got a reasonable homology with it. Its ability to bind to nasopharyngeal ACE2 now puts it into the domain of high infectivity. And so that puts it alongside the common cold, puts it alongside other viruses that are highly infective that are in the upper respiratory tract. But it's still an angiotensin 2 game, because if you look at its close cousin, which is NL63, which is the coronavirus that's involved in the common cold, it predominantly goes to the upper respiratory tract and also binds angiotensin too.
Can I interrupt to ask Gary? My screen is populated by all these people I've never seen before.
They're all really nice people. We'll get them to introduce themselves in a little while.
I just didn't know that we've been invaded.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, you're being invaded by quite a few system scientists and engineers.
Oh, well, I'll just go back to biology.
How are you, Eugene? You keeping warm there? Yeah.
It's been freezing cold today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And biology is all of those things and more, right?
Big yours? Sorry, I missed that.
Yeah, I was saying, you said you're going back to biology, but I said, but biology is all those things we talked about and more.
Well, I don't know that engineering is a biology. I think biology is engineering.
Oh, I think biology produces some of the most marvelous engineering I've ever seen.
All
One
right.
of those is our own bodies.
Yeah, no, I think that's all right. That's fair enough.
Yeah.
I think we need to look at the body from an engineering point of view. I completely agree with that.
Mm.
Having been brought up on Guyton and people like that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think this is going to be a very interesting meeting today.
I guess it's yeah.
The meeting of many worlds.
That's right. Yeah.
Kevin, thank you for that stuff on DMX 200.
Right.
Did you see my reply?
Yes, I only just saw it 5 minutes ago. I don't think it is one of those cytokine ones that you've mentioned, but I'll have to check it up a bit more.
It's
I
just that
have something about it. So, but those ones you mentioned didn't ring a bell.
no, it's just that it's that CXR2 that is the is what angiotensin 2 stimulates in neutrophils.
Right.
And gets them to do all their clever tricks. And the specific antagonist blocks that receptor. And so I wondered if your TMX200 was another agonist for that receptor, whether there are cross reactivities with those receptors and whatever. I just didn't know.
Right.
I've been learning immunology.
The person who knows the most about it probably is Kevin Flegger at University of WA Pharmacol. So I might approach him. But chemically, it's a very strange molecule, this DMX200. It's an organogermanium compound with 2 germanium metals in it with oxygen and carbon, etc. And I haven't seen a molecule like that ever as a drug.
Yeah. How much germanium occurs naturally?
I think it is probably one of the rare metals.
I mean, it's not part of our daily requirement, is it?
No. Do you know if Jenny will be joining us today, Richard?
She told me that she had an incredibly hectic day, and I think I'd say it's probably pretty doubtful, to be honest.
Okay.
I know she wants to, but she told me this morning it was pretty wild day.
Okay.
Oh, Bevan, the paper, one of the other papers you sent on linoleic acid and icosapentaenoic acid was fascinating.
Yeah, very cheap to make.
Yeah, but it does raise something really important. The binding site um, uh, between the spike protein and angiotensin 2, I thought was pretty much at a loss in terms of any pharmacological intervention, because it's quite featureless, it's quite planar. But in
Yes.
actual fact, when you think of lipids, they're quite featureless and planar as well. And so it's a very obvious way to go.
Yes. It's not clear to me whether it goes on as the undissociated acid or as the linololate. I haven't read the paper in Science closely enough to work that out.
The
That could
linolenic
be
is usually as a triglyceride, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Could be important as to what pH you actually make it up at.
Well, it's a really important issue because the linolenic and linoleic exist in nature almost in all systems as a triglyceride,
Right.
which would make one think that maybe the protein is intercalating between two arms of the lipid,
Yes.
if you see what I'm saying. And
Yeah.
and that would well and truly trap it.
Yes. I think it's got an unsaturated group in it too.
It does.
The lin part refers to, so it's not a
the
saturated
omega-3. Yeah.
fatty acid. Yeah.
Yeah. But it was it's a pretty sensible way to go.
Right. So, sorry, Richard.
Go ahead.
Is it okay if I start to do introductions? Yeah. So we are still missing a couple of key members of the team. It's unfortunate that Jenny. It sounds like Jenny won't be able to make it to join us this morning. Jenny's the deputy editor of the journal that we're targeting, and was one of the original members of this particular group that we've started up. But as you can see, Eugenie and Bevan and Richard, we have a few extra people here today. And what I'll do is I'll just give a little bit of an introduction, if I may, and share my screen and explain why we have these strange people joining us. So if we go back to the papers and the overall presentation. So I think I'm not sure if I showed you this last time, but basically I've put together a presentation to basically try and capture the scope of the papers. And at the beginning of the presentation, I've laid out the 8 papers as we currently stand, with originally the first paper being essentially an introduction of an interwoven series. And the papers we have, Felix isn't here either yet, so maybe Felix will join us soon. But Felix is writing a paper which is essentially a narrative on how did we get here. I'm putting together a paper which is looking at essentially the science of systems. Felix is joining us now, that's great. There's Eugenia's looking at a paper on essentially our host response and how our host response is involved in a lot of the problems that we see with COVID, and that there's a lot more possibility than just one silver bullet. We have Bevan, who's looking after long COVID, and by looking at long COVID, potentially insights for recovery. Richard is looking at essentially a paper which is this tension between simplicity and complexity, viral simplicity overcoming our complexity. Arno is looking at technology enablers and the opportunity of technology for better situational awareness, better metrics, better means to make decisions. And then we had in mind a more social orientated paper, which was where we need to go to make us more aware, more wise, more adaptable. And this is one of the reasons why some of the extra people have been brought in today to particularly help on these papers here, the opportunity of technology, working with Arno and also on this social aspect, and also helping me a little bit more on this science system science part. So, and as I go through the presentation, what I've done is I've got just a starting point in terms of ideas for the scope, and identified authors and people who can immediately help with the authorship, and also listed some opportunities. So that's the only overall idea, and why we've invited a few extra people today. So I think it would be good if we could just go around and give a brief introduction and explain a little bit about who we are, so that we can start to get more awareness of who is who. So I'll just go from left to right as I can see it on the screen. So Eugenie, would you mind explaining a little bit about where you are, where you come from, what your interests are?
Well, as I explained, I'm it's not even a biologist. I'm a physiologist and pharmacologist. From way back, I did a medicine originally, and I'm particularly interested in the renin-angiotensin system. I've spent quite a amount of my time looking at it in the fetus and in the adult, and in cardiovascular and in renal physiology, and its role in development of the kidney, etc. So when COVID came along and the argument about not using ARBs or ACE inhibitors because they were nasty, I lost my temper and wrote an article pointing out that everyone was wrong, and asked Gary, who I knew was one person on the other side of the world who could see the role of the renin-angiotensin system and inflammation. And this is really, I suppose, where this began in a way.
Yeah. Thanks, Eugenie. That's great. Richard, you're up.
Right. Thanks, Gary. I'm a pharmacologist. I'm retired as a professor at the University of South Australia. My career in pharmacology has covered chronic disorders, cardiovascular dementia, and more recently cancer, and looking at the pharmacological activities across those chronic disorders. When probably about 8 or 9 years ago, with Jenny Martins in Newcastle, we decided to embark on a series of projects looking at repurposing of existing therapeutics in cancer, because we'd really started to appreciate how pleiotropic pharmaceutical molecules are. And of the 2,500-3,000 approved pharmaceuticals and probably another 8,000 experimental, could you use techniques nowadays to find other actions of these pharmacological agents in addition to those that are already identified? And so we went down that cancer road in a big way, and have done quite a bit in that area. In fact, a lot in that area. But when COVID came along, we said, well, the same thing should apply here. Can we repurpose existing therapeutics, which in many ways is now going very close to exactly the same path Eugenie has gone down. And we landed in the same spot in terms of the renin-angiotensin system, because it became so clear that on the stage there was a predominant actor, and that was the renin-angiotensin system. And so the issue of repurposing existing agents in that area became important. And so bit by bit, there was a meeting of the minds in the same area of repurposing existing therapeutics in this pandemic. Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, Richard. Bill, would you just say a few words about yourself and your interests?
Yeah, I've spent my whole career really looking at how people around the world, because I happened to begin with an airline, British Overseas Airways, and looking at how they got things done. And in the end, ended up in the States with a pharmaceutical company in the international division doing the same thing. And then in the World Bank, looking at all different sectors, including health, but energy and so on. But what I really found out is that systems systems approaches were very helpful to cutting across, because we're going through so many different cultures and so many different levels of those cultures, and so many different disciplines, that you needed some kind of framework that allowed you not to give you answers, but to make sure that you were looking at the big things that needed to be looked at. And I'm ending up now at the end of my career pulling all of that together and adding a whole new phase to it with Gary and this project. But my interest in the project and my capabilities is I understand the organization side of going from global to local in terms of, you know, how you can do that with and be effective doing it.
Cheers. Thanks, Bill. Bevan.
Well, I'm pretty much like Eugenie, both in terms of age and also our science, except I started off as a pharmacy student and didn't like being a pharmacist, but I love pharmacology, particularly structure-activity relationships, how drugs worked, where they worked, and that sort of clouded the rest of my career. And I don't like to say I'm retired. I like to say I'm a non-salaried professor of pharmacology. And I enjoy the intellectual stimulation of thinking about how drugs work. And when COVID came along, I also got interested in how you could treat this terrible disease or disorder. And I gravitated towards both what Richard and Jen were doing with repurposing drugs. And as part of that, I've also got interested in the people who who seem to have this disturbed physiology months after the original virus has been eliminated. And that's a challenge in terms of what drugs you can use to help them overcome this persistent disorders in different organs. And I think that's probably what's most needed today.
Thank you, Bevan. Lorenzo, you could say a few words?
Good morning, everyone. This is Lorenzo from Nottingham. I'm a system engineer, and I'm at the minute doing my PhD in safety assurance of artificial intelligence in safety critical systems. I'm looking at the problem from a system engineering and system science point of view. So pretty much works in construction, civil engineering. I worked in rolling stock, trains and so on at a system engineering level. Yeah, that's pretty much, all I'm doing at the minute.
Yeah, thanks, Lorenzo. That's
Thank you.
great. Yeah. Felix, hi there. Oh, you're on mute.
Okay, you hear me. Good morning.
Hi.
So basically, I was in experimental brain research in Germany, Munich. And then I decided to switch over to become a doctor. And I was a senior physician in a huge psychiatric clinic in Munich. And I was, as a student, I was already involved in in Vienna's thinking of system theory with the followers of Bertalanffy and Ludwig von Bertalanffy. And then I organized meetings on systems biology in psychiatry for several years, also with Arvid Carlsson, starting with him. Trying to find another way to understand the dynamic complexity of the brain without using big data. I'm interested in understandable modeling of the brain regarding psychiatric diseases, and I developed with these guys from the systems biology group, so to say, a mathematical model of simple model of the transmitter interactions. So I call it a neurochemical mobile. And now I'm the vice president of the Bertalanffy Center in Vienna, and I'm interested in development of a systems medicine perspective in the view of Bertalanffy. It is organism-centered, more or less holistic, but perspective, but based on natural science and system science and so on. But I'm also interested in healthcare affairs. So because I was manager of quite a big hospital in Munich, department in a large hospital. So I'm interested in systemic management too, and applications and practice of systems thinking. Okay, so, and I'm very happy that I found Gary's and Eugene's paper on the ISSS homepage, and so I said we should come together and integrate the fragmented view of on COVID and try to develop a big picture. So,
Yes.
okay.
Thanks, Felix. Yeah, and here we all are. Bruce, could you say a few words?
Good morning. My name is Bruce McNaughton, and I've been, I grew up with computers, but I moved from very technical to the people side. And a couple of years ago, I learned about living systems. And I realized that my management style was exploring how to engage with large organizations and organizational change as living systems. And it's been quite fascinating to be able to look at them and then see how they change and respond. And I see that the same thing is happening with COVID and the COVID responses. And so I'm very pleased with the topic that you have. I'm here to bring my management and experience in large, complex organizational change and understanding IT to the table and help as much as I can.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. That's really appreciated. Anand, hi.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us so late in the evening. Or is it in the morning? No, I'm confused. Don't worry about me. Carry on.
Yeah, it's 11:30 in the morning. Good morning. I started off as a technologist, very much fascinated in computers. When I started programming when I was 13, 14 years, so 32 years, I've been doing the same thing. But around 28 years, at least 17 years before, my mentor asked me this question. You are playing God to the machine. But what is the purpose of whatever you are creating? Is it useful to human beings? And then he introduced me to systems, introduced me systems thinking, systems engineering. So that changed me as a person. From then on, I have this knack of looking at things in a completely different way. So now I feel that presently in the COVID situation, I'm in ground zero. Every day I'm seeing new pathologies. And I feel very frustrated that nothing can be done. So I feel that we should it's okay, whatever is happening, let it happen. The future should not face this crisis again. We are seeing a situation where human greed and human behavior is just coming out. All the bad things about humans are coming out. Just a couple of days back, I read an article. The healthcare workers are forging their IDs to create a third dose of the Oxford vaccine. They're forging IDs to get it. I mean, this is not fair. We have a huge country. We cannot have such a situation. So I feel that digital technologies can bring a difference here. And my wife is a medical scientist. And the more I see her work, I see a lot of frustration. One of the things I found out is that in the last 1 year, the person who is doing, the team is doing a lot of COVID-related work. they published around 40 papers on COVID, different variants of COVID. It's like they have a template and they're releasing a factory. It's a paper factory where they're releasing paper after paper after paper about different strains. What is the point? You are not solving the problem. I feel that in this situation, solving the problem and dealing with all the system pathologies is more important than all the papers and publications that is happening. I want to solve the problem. I mean, people are dying. Wait, just last week, my mentor died. None of us were there with him. And he was put in a pyre where there were 10 or 12 more bodies, and all of them were lighted together. This is pathetic. We cannot have such a situation. So I feel that we have to do something for the future. We cannot let our children, grandchildren face this. We cannot let future humanity to face this. And that is my primary driving point in all this.
Yeah. Thank you, Anand. That's really appreciated. Janet, were you able to say a few words?
Oh, hello, Gary.
Welcome.
Hello, everybody. My background's in sociology and social anthropology, and I've had my camera muted because I'm actually busy putting in proofs for a book that is called From Polarization to Multi-Species Relationships from Springer. And it's a collection of authors spanning biology to education, and the topic is to look at the way in which we have categorized relationships and the need to think quite differently about how we relate to others, including the environment. A lot of the work covers the issue of habitat loss and the implications for human animals as well as other species. And I've been interested in what Jane Goodall and Attenborough have been saying, along with botanists such as Alan Rayner. And they've all been stressing the implications of loss of habitat and what this actually means for dispossession and displacement, and how this affects the well-being of everyone. And the implications, of course, of agricultural animals being farmed in ways that are bad for their health, give us some indication of perhaps some of the things we should bear in mind. Certainly, many of the epidemics in the past have been related to the way in which species have been contained and farmed and trafficked. And so I should stress that my interest is in critical systemic thinking. I've worked on mitigation and adaptation to climate change and complex health, housing, and social inclusion needs. And my definition now of housing is actually not just domestic housing, but habitat for all living systems, all living beings, ranging, as Donaldson and Kimlicka have said in their book on Zoopolis, that we should worry about domestic habitats, liminal habitats that we share with other animals. We should be concerned about agricultural habitat and also maintaining wild habitats. And when, of course, we don't have an environment that we can live in a healthy manner, and we are displaced, then we come into contact with other species and we don't have immunity. And of course, a great deal of discussion around everything from swine flu to bird flu, and of course all the discussions around potentially how COVID-19 came about. So the arguments from many of my contributors, and I share their concerns, is around the need to sustain food, water and energy security and habitats to ensure that living systems are able to sustain themselves, and that pandemics are linked with climate change, and they are linked with our current way of engaging with the environment. So it is a result of inappropriate production and consumption and marketing in the way in which we manage our food systems and our relationships with others. So that's my contribution. I have written a paper which is in systems research and behavioral science, which covers some of the points, but the book should be out in about 2 months' time.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Janet. Yeah, so that really is, you know, bringing everything together then into, you know, into the big picture, the really big picture. So that's great. Okay, so as you can see, there's a massive wealth of experience and diversity. But I think, you know, as you go through all of those little introductions, you can see, you know, well, I can see, and I'm sure you can see, you know, logical connections between all of those different things. So that's great. So I'm just on sort of like some sort of logistics kind of thing. So I know that Jennifer is looking for drafts of papers by the end of July. Is that correct, Richard? You're
I think it was the end of June, early July,
okay.
was my recollection. But I'd be quite happy for it to be the end of July. So.
Yes, yeah. There's an awful lot going on at the moment. So yes, yeah. There's a couple of conferences that we're supporting and all sorts of things. Yes. So what I'll do is I think probably the best way of doing this is going through it paper by paper and then just letting the lead author give a little bit of an update on where we are. Before we, I think I'm sharing at the moment. Before we start. Just to explain again the big picture in terms of the papers. Now, I think many of you have seen a framework that we've been developing in terms of systems knowledge about systems. So this is you know, a candidate framework for system science. Here we have categories of knowledge related to form, function, and fit in terms of identity, behavior, cycles, capability, value, and consciousness, the experience of things. And here we have, if you like, stages in the acquisition or development of knowledge. So here are concepts. So the key words we use when we discuss these categories of knowledge. Here we have a placeholder for theories and frameworks about this knowledge. Here we've got big ideas and principles which would be derived from those frameworks. Here we've got our assets for essentially acting and engaging with society as a whole. And what we've done is and these are the pathologies which a systems approach can help to address. And what we've done is working with Bill is we've mapped on the papers actually onto this framework, and this has given us some insights into purpose and also potential topics to consider. So in terms of the papers, there's not a lot of change in terms of their title and scope, apart from a couple. So paper one needs to be more about our motivations, and I'll get in contact with Jenny and talk to her about this individually. And also we've identified the need for essentially an achieving balance paper, which Bill has stepped forward to take a lead on. But okay, so here we have a philosophy, essentially a philosophy orientated paper in terms of how do we get here. Here's the paper I'm working on system science, which is about the theory of systems. We have a paper on host response, the paper on long COVID, Arnon's paper on technologies enabler for better decisions, paper 8, which is about wisdom for the future society, and I'm looking to Bruce and Janet to help to bring that together. There's the viral perspective, which Richard is working on. So that's the overall scheme. And this by putting things into this framework, this might give you some ideas in terms of the potential emphasis of the papers. But don't worry about that too much. All I'm trying to get across really is that we are covering, from the perspective of system science, it looks like all of the different angles. So I'll talk to Jenny about this one-to-one. I'll try to find a time when we can both meet to go through it. But what I've been trying to do on this presentation is identify a scope, and I'm also putting the link to the Google Docs to make it easier for people to find the material. So if we go on to the narrative, Felix, where are we on the narrative? And I also know that Janet has provided some comments, I believe, on that paper as well. So where are we on that one? Felix, you might be on mute again.
I think we are more or less in the same state. I have to integrate the viewpoints of Janet, and I would like to to stress the point that that the interdisciplinarity of understanding or describing the COVID crisis has several flaws, and that we would have an advantage if we could use a more integrative framework like the biopsychosocial model from Engel, for instance, to integrate the viewpoints. And it is related to the German-Austrian discussion. Unfortunately, I have to focus on this viewpoints. So I will proceed in the next days, because we had very many problems with the lockdown and opening the lockdown in Vienna right now, and so I was a little bit in my role as a public health so to say expert. I was also involved in this discussion, so I will integrate them in somehow like vaccination and who is prioritized and so on and so forth. So.
Okay. Janet, would you mind giving your perspective based on the comments that you made? You might be on mute, or you might be busy working on your book.
I think that Janet's viewpoints are exactly, as I read them, are exactly as she described her scientific position. And this is very important to broaden the view to the zoonosis, which are resulting by the interpenetration of human systems into natural ecosystems, so loss of habitats of animals and all these things for the bad. And this is exactly the very wide frame, asking what is our culture doing, and is it are the pandemics not only or now a great part a result of the human culture of using or abusing the nature.
Okay, right. Thank you.
Yes, that I think sums it up very well, Felix. Sorry, I had to unmute myself. I think that you've got it very well framed in your response. So,
so you're welcome. So you're welcomed as a co-author or something like that. So we can exchange. I wrote you some in the chat room.
Sure.
I wrote a comment.
I'd be happy to correspond with you, Felix.
Okay.
Super.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks, Janet. Yeah. So I mean, you can discuss between you, but I would be quite happy to take my name off as the second, and you was there, Janet, if you were willing. So I'm not asking you to commit now, but give that some thought. So the next paper is on COVID, the relationship with system science to enable better solutions. I've actually discussed this with Javier Almagro, who's the co-chair for the System Science Working Group in COSI, because we have a lot of common interests, and he will also be helping me on this paper. There's a lot of synergies with another paper that I'm writing for the Journal of Systems Thinking. So I'm hoping that there should be a lot of crossover of information between those two papers. And there's 2 sessions that we're doing at the INCOSI and the ISSS conference on realizing the value of systems thinking and system science in essentially complex situations. So there's a lot of synergies. So I think I'm reasonably on track for this. So COVID, this is your paper, Eugenie. So what I put here was just a few thoughts. It's your paper. Feel free to go through that as you will. But could you give us an update on where you are with your thinking on this at the moment?
Well, I'm heavily into writing, and I guess interestingly enough, we talk about the fragmentation of knowledge into silos. Well, when I came to what I wanted to do was to look at the relationships between the immune response and the role of the renin-angiotensin system. And so I've had to go and learn a lot of immunology, and I now have a fragmentary feeling of what immunology is about, particularly innate immunity. But the message that's come through to me is that you can't think about innate immunity without thinking about angiotensin, because when you go to autoimmune diseases, where you go to viral infections or response to virus, you find that somebody somewhere has shown that angiotensin stimulates this receptor, blocks this receptor, puts in an ACE inhibitor, and you reduce this response, etc. So that's taken me a lot of mental effort. I'm leaving the spike. I'm leaving the spike protein at the moment because so I'm down here at level of tissue inflammation as a general thing. My plan is to go into the lung particularly as an example of what happens when you have inflammation, because I don't think it matters who causes the inflammation. A lot of the response is exactly the same, whether it's putting in a toxic substance or whatever, and try and marry that with the pathobiology of COVID itself. And then, basically the rest of it falls out naturally. So my only anxiety is, I don't know how long this paper is going to be, because I haven't done anything on, I haven't fitted in any therapeutics or repurposing of drugs, but they sort of almost fall out as you go. And I'm wondering whether we shouldn't have another one on your a new column on the right, where we look at potential repurposing as and with Bevan and Richard, who are much more expert than me, could bring a lot of what I found, put it into that context and build the drugs around it. I can do it for some drugs, but I guess what threw me completely was, and I wanted to bring this up because it relates to Bevan's long COVID, that you can induce multiple sclerosis and encephalomyelitis in mice. And when you do that, you find that the plaques are loaded with angiotensin. And the receptor, the AT1 receptor, is upregulated. And when you treat these models, you can actually reverse the paralysis. And in fact, the plaques in multiple sclerosis in human multiple sclerosis have all the components of the renin-angiotensin system. So my basic thesis is, wherever you go, for any type of inflammation, be autoimmune through to infection, this system is going to be there.
Mm.
And at the tissue level, what is the feedback control? There's only really one feedback control, and that is ACE2 with the law, through the law of mass action. And basically, so if you knock off ACE2, you've got a very, very nasty situation.
Yeah.
So that's the way I'm working on it.
Yeah, that sounds great, Eugenie. What I'll do is I'll cut and paste this particular slide out and send it to you.
Yes, please.
Yeah, and then you can update it and send it back, and I'll reintegrate it. Yeah. Okay, great. That's thanks. So Bevan, the long-term consequences, long COVID. How are you doing?
I wrote a grant to get funding for a study to actually look at that, and it wasn't funded, but I'm actually going to use what I wrote in the grant as the basis of the paper. And I'm pretty sure I'll be able to make the deadline for end of June with that. But basically, it all goes back to what happened with the first SARS-CoV-1, which wasn't an extensive, didn't reach a pandemic stage. But there was a very good study done in Canada of 21 healthcare workers in hospital who caught it. And every one of them came down with a long-lasting chronic fatigue syndrome that lasted for over a year. And although it was a small number of 21, they had a good match group of same age, same gender, etc., who none of them came down with the chronic fatigue syndrome. So it was pretty clear that the viral infection somehow triggered something which caused this chronic fatigue syndrome, which just didn't go away.
Mm.
To take it a bit further, there was another paper came out by another group which was studying aged rats. They're not easy studies to do because people don't bother to let their rats get old. The labs that do let their rats get to say the age of 2 years, they found that the blood vessels exhibited what they called oxidative stress, and they didn't relax when they were given the traditional relaxant chemicals. But what they found was that if they treated them with a transcription factor activator, NRF2,
yeah,
they were able to restore glutathione levels in the blood vessels, and then they responded to the relaxants. And that gave me the clue to think, well, because there's been these all reports of people with COVID having the same symptoms 3 or 4 months down the track, they may well have this viral alteration in their blood vessels causing oxidative stress, and that the way to treat it would be with the NRF2 activators.
Mm.
And that's really what I've focused on. And there have been some studies in some other diseases. I think it's called Ehlers syndrome, which has a chronic fatigue side to it. They respond very well to melatonin. And I was suggesting that melatonin could be used to treat the long COVID patients. And there are some groups in UK which are looking into this. So I'm hoping to be able to find some more clinical data on that to sort of round it all off.
Interestingly, I think the ACE2 knockout has impaired NRF2 pathways.
Okay.
And so it all fits together with losing ACE2 as the controller of the of inflammation.
Yep.
Yeah.
And limiting production of ROS.
All right. Well, if you can send me that paper, I can work it in and put you on as the co-author, etc. So
yeah, I think that would make sense. Yeah, I think there's a lot of connections between your paper and this one, Eugenie. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, thanks. That's great, Bevan. Thank you. And I'll do the same for you if that's okay. If that would help, I can cut out this particular slide and send that to you to take a look at and update. And then you can send it me back and I'll reintegrate it if that's your preferred way of
Okay.
working. Okay.
May I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead, Felix.
Question. Peyvin, what is the systems view or the systems modeling perspective in your very interesting paper?
Well, I guess the systems modeling is aging and loss of the ability of blood vessels to relax. And therefore, people, as they age, their blood pressure goes up, and often they don't respond to the conventional antihypertensive drugs. And the doctors seem to accept that. They don't seem to be upset if the person's blood pressure is 160 over 95 or something. Is that, would you agree with that, Eugenie? That they seem to accept systolic going up with age?
They do, and quite frankly, what I hate is the fact that there's a lot of autonomic instability associated with it. You know, I've noticed very close relationships. I have a very close relationship with someone who is brilliant at spiking with a 150 diastolic, and then developing a 60 diastolic.
Wow.
So there's a sympathetic dysfunction, which really frustrates me, because the medical profession just prescribed the one dose of drug. And it can be quite dangerous, was quite dangerous when he was out on a tractor. So, but it's very common. And I agree with you. I think it's related to loss of flexibility of response, possibly also slight slowing of autonomic reflexes.
Yeah.
All of which comes together.
Yeah. So my idea is, as I was doing some input in the early times of our group, that there's an interaction between the nervous system, like as you said, the autonomous system, which is contributing very much to the high pressure or any vascular irritation or the heart frequency, and you have the endocrine system, like the cortisol system, and you have the immune system, and the interaction of these three systems might be the Bermuda Triangle to understand COVID. This is at least, I have some evidence, and this is what our publication was, on systems medicine and COVID. And so I just wonder where we can connect with this approach. So this was not clear for me. Okay, thank you. It was just.
Yeah, no, it's good. So I think that's again something that's worth emphasizing. Although we're adding sort of like primary and secondary authors, there's the potential for everyone to comment and contribute to all of the papers, because we all have our own unique insights and perspectives. Okay, but yeah, it's great. Thanks. Okay, so back to paper 6, the taking the viral perspective. Richard, maybe you can give us an update on where you are.
Okay, Gary. I think I'm about a third to a halfway through the first draft manuscript, and thanks, Eugenie, for your comments on one of the earlier ones that I sent to you. They were very helpful. I'd just like to track back a bit and say, what is the unmet need that we have a principal focus on? Certainly in my mind, it's the following. There's certainly great news in terms of the appearance of the vaccines, but for a year, we really didn't exploit therapeutics in a way to get people through a disease state, those who were infected with COVID and went on to lower respiratory tract infection and then serious consequences after that. And so in looking at the reasons why, there's a temptation to go to the different disciplines, to go to pharmacology, to go to anatomy, physiology, and so on and so forth. But the answers don't lie in one of those, in any one of those alone. It's as if one is looking at a whole series of different languages, when in reality, we should be speaking Latin or something that cuts across many of those languages. So what I've done is gone back to basics. And the basics are around the reality that we that we really rarely talk about, and that is that every person around this table is comprised of about 40 trillion cells. And the virus that has paralyzed the entire world is about 1,000th the size of a single human cell. And so this this will automatically take you to a conflict between simplicity in terms of the virus and complexity in terms of the human. And as Felix points out often, those 42 trillion cells only work because we have this devolved balance and counterbalance system that's in place. And it just turns out one of the principal targets of this virus is a key actor in that, that balance counterbalance process, not only in cardiovascular, but in immunology and inflammation and everything else. So I've decided to forget about the individual disciplines, but come at this from the standpoint of simplicity versus complexity. What is the power of the simplicity that has effectively paralyzed the complexity? And when you do that, and I'm working my way through it now, you see some quite interesting, I think, insights. And the first one is the absolute event, the first event in a human that that's associated with infection is simply the binding of relatively few amino acids on the spike protein of the virus with ACE2. And you're talking about a receptor domain of probably no more than 100 amino acids. That's all. So you've got something 1,000th the size of a single cell, now encroaching into a 40 trillion cell entity and only binding in a tiny, tiny fraction. And that consequence paralyzes the entire system, or can paralyze the entire system. So what is it that drives that process? If we understand that, can we then follow the virus through a human and then understand each step of the way and then be somewhat enlightened in terms of how we can treat the disease? And when you do that, you see the following, and that is that not only do we have 42 trillion cells, but we have 42 trillion unique cells. We are one species. The ACE2 enzyme sits across thousands of species of mammals. If you took the bat population alone, there are 1,400 species of bat, most of which have got ACE2 in them. And the ACE2 in that broad species of bats range from not binding SARS-CoV-2 to binding it, and every combination you want in the middle. So by now looking at this whole issue of binding and interaction of surfaces, you now start to get an understanding of where we sit and why you would have transmission, for example, into a human, then transmission within a human. The end point is simply this, that the most powerful driver in the entire system goes back to the fundamentals of mass action, the laws of mass action, which is effectively your affinity constants to the KD for binding for the virus to a human receptor. And Eugenie, that is so powerful a technique. If you look at anything in physiology, anything in immunology and the rest of it, the most astonishing thing occurs when you look at it from this perspective. And that is that the initial event of binding is the dominant event in the process. If you look at a physiologist with an organ bath, when they drop agonists into the organ bath and they do a dose response curve, it's that initial binding that's reflected all the way through that process. And it could be contraction all the way through muscle contraction, so on and so forth. You see the same thing in cancer with drugs that interact with key receptors in cancer cells and so on and so forth. So it's that binding, that initial binding event is fundamental. And it means the following. It means the KD, or the mathematics of the affinity, is the dictate in terms of what goes on. So wherever I've got to with this, I've looked at across species in terms of where angiotensin 2 sits. There's huge evidence for tropism there. Humans have a tropic effect on our angiotensin 2 as a single species. We can't change it. We're stuck with it. We have an angiotensin 2 that's highly attractive to this virus and similar ones. So we got ACE2 is highly attractive to SARS-CoV-1, SARS-CoV-2, NL3, 63, and so on and so forth. The that binding then dictates what happens within the human. That KD in affinity when you first get infected is in the upper airways, and depending how effective you handle that upper airway disease, it either becomes an entity of low consequence, in other words, you survive it, or it becomes an entity of severe consequence if it drops to the lower respiratory tract. And so by mapping the KD, and you can do this through the process, what's happened with SARS-CoV-2, unlike SARS-CoV-1, SARS-CoV-1 goes to the lower respiratory tract only and is not that highly infective. SARS-CoV-2 goes to the upper respiratory tract, highly infective, but in 20% of individuals, there's the risk of it dropping to the lower respiratory tract, and now it becomes key. The other thing that is absolutely fundamental is by the time, when it's in the upper respiratory tract, by the time it's detected, half of the virus load has already been made. And it turns out that when the virus goes to the lower respiratory tract, it is an inefficient way for the virus to spread. So the virus has done all its spreading by way of the upper respiratory tract in the same way as influenza does. That means that the pathology that we look at in terms of COVID-19 is pathology that's consequential and an event that's occurred almost after the primary virus event, which is the spread. And so I'm arguing that really the KD gives you two disease states. It gives you an upper respiratory tract disease where the virus is replicated like fury. It's made half its load. It's spread to other individuals. And with 20% of the people, it goes to lower respiratory tract, where it now acts like MERS and SARS-CoV-1, not particularly infective, but massive damaging inflammation in the human. And so you can actually now map this all the way through in terms of simply looking at the affinities of the virus. So that's where I am in terms of the document itself. I'm getting pretty close to about halfway through, but there's an enormous amount of reading involved in this.
Right. Yeah.
Can I just make an observation?
Yeah.
Interesting part that Richard you spoke about is you started with the analogy that how human is made of 40 trillion cells, and how a virus is only a 1 in 1,000 the size of the cell. If I sort of like look at it from a system point of view, it sounds like, you know, it's an indication that, which I think is a truth as well, that, you know, size doesn't matter when it comes to systems. So it sounds like this simplicity can disintegrate an entire system. So if you and if you look at it like as a sort of like a system observation, a virus in a network as well. So you got the internet, huge network, right? Or let's talk about, like, for example, the CIA network is so strong and you know, as a network, as a system, and then, you know, but it can be taken down with a virus. So for me, it sounds like there is a connection in there. That's when it comes to maybe the term systemness. The size and the elements and the integration between elements maybe is not a factor in its resilience as in general. And also yesterday today is going to be a whole day for Bogdanov's work. And yesterday I attended a lecture in University of Hull, where there was a quantum physicist, Ravelli, was a professor Ravelli, who's drawing sort of like ideas on quantum physics and system science. And one of his inspirations is the Heisenberg, which is basically saying, you know, in the Heisenberg theory, saying that we don't know until we look. Yeah. And I feel systemness is kind of same thing. That's our system, same thing. Like, you know, because if I took the virus, right, and I put it in a small, tiny piece of paper, it will do nothing. Yeah. But if I took the virus and put it in a human being or an animal or something, it will destroy the system. Yeah. So it sounds like when it comes to systems, is that it's only relevant when you look at the situation. When you don't look at a situation, you don't know. But until you observe, then you can then the systemness appears. Yeah. So maybe obviously I'm sort of like taking your idea and I'm thinking of, you know, what that can lead me in terms of system science or system theory wise. Yeah. Maybe it's a way to look at systemness and understand Heisenberg principle of you know, we don't know until we observe, and we don't have a system until we observe, and then we can understand how this simplicity of a particular system can undermine the resilience of a complex system, or
so
the way around.
Let's tease that out in two ways. I mean, it's Schrodinger's cat, isn't it? It's the Schrodinger cat experiment, and that you just described. But if you look at the evolution of humans and the evolution of viruses, you see the contradistinction is astonishing. Humans went down a multicellular road of complexity, and viruses went down a road of total simplicity. And now you've got a clash of the two. Multicellular organisms had advantages by organizing themselves and organizing and organizing and organizing, and it did it effectively through feedback control mechanisms and so on and so forth. But it was stuck with one thing when it comes to the issue that makes viruses work. The thing that drives viruses is their ability to change their surface. And the ability to change their surface is dependent on a high mutation rate in their RNA or DNA. They have no repair mechanisms. They don't want them. They want as many mutations as possible in as short a possible time. Humans went down a totally different road that said, we'll protect our DNA totally from any damage. We'll put every repair mechanism we possibly can around our DNA to stop mutations coming forward. Because if we have mutations coming forward, we're going to end up with neoplastic states, tumor states, cancers, and so on and so forth. So you have this astonishing difference between two evolved systems, one evolving constantly to simplicity and one evolving to complexity. And now you've got this clash.
You know, that brings me to my mind is the idea of requisite variety. So they say, you know, the Ashby's law, like only variety can deal with variety. Sounds to me the virus has got less variety, yet it's more successful than a system that has more variety, like a human being. So maybe maybe there is something in there that to question whether that, you know, it's not any variety that can handle variety. There is a type of there's something like, you know, a virus has got far less variety of features or capabilities, things, and it has got only one rule, like, you know, you multiply, right? And mutate, that's it. While a human being or multicellular, you said, I picked up on the word stuck. It's focused on variety of features to protect itself with all sort of mechanisms and organization and everything. But then this small variety, which is the mutation and multiplication, that on its own was enough for the virus to actually survive all these billions of years, even before a human beings ever, and will ever even after that. So it sounds to me, this is maybe, Gary, maybe something to explore, see, I'm not say question, but maybe understand the concept of variety for ash bees, obviously inspired by the living systems, saying whether is it any variety that deals with variety, or what sort of quality of that variety is, and how do we actually zoom it in and say, oh, this variety is a good one, this variety is not a good one. I mean, Richard, what do you think?
If you understand that process, and this is where I'm coming from, you'll understand how to intervene, because it's that very process which is driving the virus not only into the human, but sequentially through the human. So there's no one disease in terms of time, in terms of this virus. There are different disease states as it goes through. And so therefore therapy must understand this to be involved. So there'll be a certain set of therapeutics that'll be incredibly important at the early stages. There'll be another set that will be only important at the latter stages and not work in the early stages. So you're absolutely right in driving that. If you looked at that simplicity, as I said before, and you're right, if you were to put that virus, SARS-CoV-2, onto a piece of paper, nothing would happen. You put that one virus particle onto an epithelial cell in the cilia, in the nasopharyngeal region, and you could end up with the death of a human being. And it's just the interaction of surfaces at the end of the day. But the interaction of those surfaces are so powerfully driven by the DNA or RNA and the mutation rates in that virus that it's not just a coincidence, it's not just a coincidental activity. It's part of the laws of mass action, as I said before. And if you look, for example, at the binding of the virus to ACE2, we should be forgetting about the fact that the ACE2 is attached to a human. It's predominantly the same equilibrium reaction you'd have in a beaker. And it's that equilibrium reaction that spreads from one human to other humans to around the world. Because with a high affinity, all this virus wants to do is occupy every site that it can that has that set of complementary binding affinities.
Can I just interject here?
Yep.
You're arguing that we are only 0.01% of the total biomass of the Earth, and viruses are 0.04% of the total Earth biomass.
Yeah.
It seems totally logical that it's hands down for a winner because there's much more of it.
Yeah.
I just wanted to raise that. And I wanted to raise another issue. You keep saying that the infectivity in the lung, and this comes back to what Lorenzo's saying, it sort of virtually stops there. But that virus has to creep out to the rest of the body.
Oh, it does.
Does it crawl along endothelial vessels? And is that just like my computer infecting somebody else's computer, so that it does a power function in terms of spread?
Yeah.
Do you see that as the lethality of the virus once it gets to the lung as distinct from the nasopharynx?
Can I say something?
Go ahead, Anand.
Yeah. See, I have a very simple question. Are we the virus, and is the virus the cure?
I'm glad you said this, because I was just about to say something like I've read somewhere that 8% of a human DNA has a virus. There's some doctors of that, and maybe this is added to Anand's question here. Like, can that be also a factor in the success of the virus on a human being?
Retrotransposons, sorry if I got wrong, are thought to be incorporated viruses. In order to form the human placenta, you need to have a viral particle called syncytium in order to actually form the placenta. So we've been using viral particles to design our organ systems in the process of evolution. So it's that, I mean, that relationship is quite fascinating.
Mm.
I'm not sure the viruses have it all its own way, Richard.
Yeah.
No, the reason I'm asking is all these computer viruses, they are designed for the purpose of destruction. But we don't know what is the purpose of the virus. We don't know what is the purpose of a human being.
Oh, yeah, all right.
So we really don't know.
No, I agree completely.
Yeah, and the reason I say, are we the virus, is because there is a case which my wife visited. It was in the forest area. And what they have been doing is, one of the things that human beings do is they constantly keep deforesting many good green areas. And we keep talking about carbon footprint and things like that. So they went ahead, and there's a whole village which went ahead and deforested a big area. And a month or two later, everybody in the village, 100% of the people in the village, everybody was infected. The mortality rate of those people were around 18 to 20%. Nobody had any clue what is happening. So they went, they studied over years. This is happening for the last 70 years. They studied. And then they figured out that when they removed all the trees that were there, there are certain viruses which are there, which is existing in the ticks. And they came out, and the villagers were taking all the cut wood on top of their head and using it to construct their house. The ticks fell on them, they bit them, and somewhere the transmission happened to human being, and we have no answer to a virus that was in hibernation for 10,000 years.
Go ahead, Felix.
Yeah, I like this discussion very much, but regarding to the paper from Richard, I lose a little bit the connection, but I think probably there should be another paper which is has the title Systems Philosophy or something like that, because it's very much oriented to basic principles like Heisenberg or the small and the large and all these things like chaos theory is implicated. And so if some of these contributions could be integrated to a paper, a perspective paper, something like that, it would be very helpful, because if the reviewers are, from the medical faculty, they probably don't like it very much if it is if a paper is not so much data based. This is what I just recommend, because I have a bad history of publishing systems medicine with a solid rejection rate, because of we cannot understand this and all these comments from the editor and the reviewers. So I think they're very important thoughts on the basic principles, but they might be not so helpful. But I don't know this paper where we will the journal where we will publish it, but this was just a comment. But Richard has to decide. Yeah.
I agree with Felix. I think we do need a more big philosophy point of view.
Yeah.
But the other thing I'd like to see, because I'm really, really, really angry about it. In fact, I had a letter published in the Sydney Morning Herald today about the incompetence of management. And I do hope somewhere in this whole system of papers, we can produce a paper that points to how various governments, our government now included, have totally and utterly mismanaged, and why, from a systems point of view, have they mismanaged? I mean, our vaccine rollout has been incredibly bad, and yet we had the whole world to look at before we started rolling it out. What goes wrong within organisations that this can happen? And that surely is a systems problem.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Agree. Okay, and I think there are logical places for that that knowledge. Okay, so I'll move on to Anand. So it's interesting how that paper 6 leads on to, you know, the wider social systems, and here now we're now talking about technologies as essentially an enabler for better healthcare in these kind of situations. And Anand, how are you getting on with this?
Can I share a presentation?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Okay, so this was something that I did till September, October of last year. And I thought that digital healthcare.
Anand, we don't see your presentation.
I think Gary has to give him host rights or something.
I think I have.
Oh.
But that is often a common mistake I make.
Can you see it now?
Yep.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah. Okay. So I started with the notion of having a personalized digital healthcare system, and felt that it will be the solution to the entire problem in healthcare. And over 1 year, I realized it's wrong. What I'm trying to show is what was my basis. Yeah, viruses are emerging, and sometimes it is re-emerging, sometimes it is deliberately emerging. It's a mess. Yeah, but they are just like living organisms, and you simply cannot eradicate all of them and say we are done with it. All this eradication is just to be happy about that we have done something, but in reality, nothing of that sort happens. So now, one thing I realize in this whole global thing is all of us are connected. We're not remote, we're totally connected. It just takes 8 hours or 10 hours for us to reach from one corner of the world to other corner of the world. So when people interact, the viruses, the pathogens, all of them, they will also transmit. And there is no mechanism that we have to prevent it from transmitting. So we see this in COVID. Everything is stressed. Things are emerging continuously. And there's so much focus on surveillance. And one of the things they say is test, trace, and something else. And I don't know why I need to go and volunteer and say, okay, I have this virus. Because I see many people in my society. They have a virus that didn't bother informing anybody, including the neighbors. They're roaming around without masks, spreading it. We had one case 1 month back, and in the last 1 month, we had 100 cases. There's no traceability, no municipality, nothing. Nobody was here. We just left to ourselves. Too much cost. And the coverage is very, very minimal because the scale is very high. We are 130 crores. If you look at the world, it's 8 billion is the population. We won't be able to cover everybody. Not possible. There's no way to cover everybody. And then what we cover, this is fever, cough, difficulty in breathing, loss of sense or smell. But everybody having cold, they have the symptoms. Everybody having H1N1, they have the symptoms. How are we going to distinguish? And WHO gives a bigger number. Still, this is inadequate. So when I started, I felt that if we capture all the symptoms for different diseases, then the problem is solved. And then there are different stakeholders, the patient who is affected by the disease, their communities, governments, healthcare providers. Now, if I look at COVID, hospitals, vaccinators, pharmacies, they all got their profits. They got everything. The healthcare industry got their profits. But the problem is not solved. And it looks like for another 2 years, the problem will still not be solved, and it's just draining the industry, draining the people. Now, it is particularly funny because the people who are affected are neither the rich people or the poor people. Governments focus on only the poor people because they are the people who vote them to power. And rich people, they have all the money to go and get whatever treatment they want. So it is the middle class, which is roughly 10 to 15% of the population, which gets affected the most. So how do we deal with this problem? So these are the stakeholders, and they have different concerns. How do you deal with it? And a lot of things here, getting right information. I mean, yesterday my wife just informed me that none of us had COVID. We didn't have COVID-like symptoms. But she underwent some procedure, some analysis in the lab. And they found out that she is resistant to the entire SARS-CoV gene. She just had Oxford vaccine, which means she should be resistant only to the spike protein. But they found out that she is resistant to the entire gene, which means all of us in the house, we are resistant. We have no symptoms. So if you have no symptoms, then we are very happily we are spreading it to our neighbors. We are wearing masks, everything, but none of us knew we must have spread it. So whatever information that's being currently captured, gathered, everything is meaningless. So digital systems, meaningless. They speak about privacy, security, everything is meaningless because nothing is under our control, nothing is visible to us. Healthcare systems, one of the things I realized is that I said there is a report, if you could just take the report, I can be compatible to every healthcare system. But there's no format for interchanging data. There's no format for interchanging customer configuration data, no format for interpreting the reports, nothing. There's no standardization. Everything is just a plain piece of paper which is scanned and from which I need to do OCR to interpret data. No data is owned by the patients. Every data is owned by insurance providers and healthcare providers. And then you go to different hospitals, they have their own analysis. They have their own standardization. And we went to the hospital in 2017, we went in 2020. They do an analysis based on 2017 data. Nothing is real. And across different geographies, even within India, there is different standardization, different rules, different policies. And at the end of it, there's always a correlate with the clinician. The clinician is not available. How am I going to correlate with the clinician? So I felt digital healthcare, if we start by digitizing everything and we can have this huge population, 2.7 billion people are having mobiles, smartphones, things will be easier. We can have a repository where all their records are there. We integrate, we do the symptoms, it can be a foundation for healthcare, things like that. It is a very good dream. But then I realized, the more I see at what is happening around me and the more I read your papers, I realize this is inadequate. We have barely scratched the surface. And this gets into details of how are we capturing data, how do we do it for the family and things like that. I will just skip all this. But what I realize is, it says WHO has recommended something. I'm ticking all the boxes, but it's totally meaningless. Simply because there are too many things here. There is political, there is technological, there is cultural, there is infrastructural. So I'll give an example. India, we have the Swachh Bharat mission, where they say we have to build toilets for everybody where there is open defecation. It's a very good initiative. It was done by the central government. They paid money, did it. Toilets were built for every house. Were done in 5 years. Now, when we go on the ground, we see people who are for whom these toilets were built. Every individual house has a toilet. Now, These people are living in shanty houses. The toilet has very strong infrastructure, very solid. So what they did is all their valuables, they kept it in the toilet. There are some places where they kept their animals, like the cow and things like that. There's a large toilet, they put the animals in the toilet. When it is raining, all their personal belongings go into the toilet. And they continue to do open defecation. So just having a healthcare change is not sufficient. We need to fundamentally rethink the way healthcare is being done, because I completely realize that it is not a system of systems that is whose boundary is healthcare. It is the ecosystem for entire humanity, which means it needs to interact with other systems. And what are these other systems? I have no idea presently. So I was only looking at things internal to healthcare. I was saying how things are, a lot of silos are there. But now when I look outside, I see that the problem is really huge. And that's where I am.
And that was fantastic,
Mm.
especially that last statement. Just incredible.
Yeah, it's really great. You see how the papers move through from topic to topic to topic and the connections. So Bruce, could you? I know I'm putting you on the spot, but have you given some thought to paper 8? You know, that rethinking of essentially the social system.
Well, I'm still in kind of acquire mode and catching up with what you've already done. But I think a lot of the pieces are there. And I think Anand's statement and presentation kind of fits into that. I'm kind of forming my my thoughts about this. I think by next week, I'll have something for you, for sure.
That's great, yeah.
So, but there's a massive amount of data and ideas that have been presented, and I'm quite excited about trying to pull them together. And
yeah.
And I think that there are some themes coming out.
Yeah, I'm hoping there's some logical connections with that paper, that presentation that you're working on for the ISSS. You know, the paper on essentially, you know, looking at the Earth and Gaia as a system of systems.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay.
Have you written a paper, Bruce, and do you have it available on Gaia? Because I'm fighting with our Academy of Science at the moment about population, and any weapon would be useful.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to share the it's only a slide presentation at this point, but I've done some writing. But what it's trying to do is identify all the systems that are interacting, and at all the different levels of of interaction. It's and it's surprising. It's not that many when you get down to it.
Yeah.
But we keep talking about them as if there are lots of different ones. So we have no consistent vocabulary. It's one of the problems I'm running up against.
Yeah.
So this, I think I'll try and integrate that into the thoughts about the paper next week.
Thanks. Yeah, and I'm sure Janet has some.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of connections there too.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's trying to put the ecosystem people back into the ecosystem, which is
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, there are many different aspects to this.
Yeah. Yeah. So there was I think was it Anand mentioned, you know, what is the purpose of people? Yeah. And what I'm starting to realize by looking at system science is that purpose is a conversation between the system of interest and the wider systems within that system, within which that system plays a part. Yeah. So purpose is a conversation, and in this case, the conversation is between us as individuals and the planetary whole.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think some of the terms that I've been trying to understand, things like society.
Yeah.
A simple word like that we all use,
Mm.
and you go, well, what does that really mean, and how does that fit into the big picture? So it's quite an interesting journey.
Yeah. Felix, you're on mute.
On off.
Yeah.
Bruce, we had an exchange in the last meeting and after the last meeting, and Eugene was also hitting the point that the management of healthcare or the providing of vaccinations and all these things, they might suffer from a systems management conception. And you mentioned all this, the new governance or the Stafford Beer and so on, and I think it would be, I don't know who will touch this topic.
I think that fits in very nicely.
Yeah, so I think it would be a very good thing because they have this top-down idea, most governments, and even in emergency case, it might be for let's say from European perspective, March, April 2020, it was sufficient to say, okay, I'm the master, I have the opinion of the experts, and now please population do this and this and this and this. So it was not good, but it was not bad really. So, but 1 year ago in summer in Austria and in Germany, they missed the point to talk to the patients, to the relatives of the patients, and to talk to the practitioners. So they still were, they slept more or less and had vacations with the so-called experts, with the virologists and epidemiologists, but they did not rethink their management. And this was not the case in Austria. That was not the case in Germany. Also, Angela Merkel is very different to most politicians, because I knew her from several years ago when I was in a consulting situation for the government, for the German government. So it might be very, very interesting and to just to push this point I would say in a separate paper even, where we can integrate this and what Eugene was saying, that I think it's really a problem. It's suboptimal. It's not bad, but it's suboptimal at least. And maybe also Bill could contribute and just say redesign the public health management. This would be one keyword even. Yeah. So okay, it was just a comment.
Thanks.
I think this is where Bill has on his model the local versus the global, or the wide. And I think there's been, at least in the UK, you start realizing that local communities have a strong public health track and tracing for other viruses that wasn't actually tapped into in terms of this one. And so where we already had capabilities available, they weren't used, and they were replicated centrally, and they lost all contact with the people and the situation. So to me, there are a number of systemic questions that arise, and I think that's something we might be able to look at in the paper.
Yeah. So Bill,
I would like to.
Oh, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I'd like to add something about this vaccination. You see, I see that the vaccination is a problem of scale. In the sense, so far, the vaccination that we have done are for children. Whether it is the polio virus or whether it is measles, rubella, the vaccination was done for children, and it was done not in a hurry, but whenever the children were brought to a hospital, a clinic or a primary healthcare center. So now we are in a situation where we say we have to vaccinate 130 crore people in a situation where the entire world is locked down, resources are very limited, logistic is very limited, there are no people to work because we don't know who is having the virus, who is spreading the virus. So we really have no reference or SOP to follow. And then there is also this need that there may be a passport kind of thing, that certification needs to be there, because otherwise then only people can travel outside. So, I mean, it is a very wicked problem, and there's no straightforward solution to it. And then you add to it political dimensions. And the state government and the central government are different. And then the state governments come and say, this is the central government's vaccine, don't take it. It's a mess. I think all these things were not covered in any of the WHO reference book. They say you have to vaccinate. How are you going to vaccinate for 8 billion people? Where is it covered? I can't find it anywhere.
Yeah, thanks, Anand. Bill, what are your reflections so far? Because I think, you know, we have an idea for a potential 9th paper. But how are your thoughts maturing on that?
Yeah, the thoughts have been the same. If you will let me share now.
Sure.
It's easier to do it with
yeah. Bear in mind, I will have to disappear in about 10-15 minutes at the most.
No problem. Share. Okay, you should be seeing the chart that I sent you. Is in a way, if you don't worry about what's in the gray part and you just think of the white part as the 9 papers that we're producing, well, what I'm producing will be in the middle. And it was, you very surprisingly, and not so surprisingly because it was Gary who did it, when you came up with this list of people and papers, you came into the natural order that I discovered. And let me say something about this natural order. This comes from you know, working at every level, from individual jobs all the way up to the design of global systems, and in every kind of culture. And when you synthesize a lifetime of doing that, what it has told me and what's been tested in the most difficult of conditions is what are systemically the most important things. And there are 3. One is that purpose is the most important by far, and I would say 9 times more than any other variable you can think of in terms of the success of a project or the failure of a project. Is 2/3 of all projects fail in no matter what area, no matter what culture. And the primary reason is agreements about purpose and the evolution of purpose as it spreads throughout the organization, involves different stakeholders, but it's still an understanding of purpose. The second one is the understanding of the power to achieve purpose. In other words, the capacity to achieve purpose. We don't understand power fully. We tend to, each culture thinks of power a different way. And in the Western culture, we tend to think of power only as control. But we have found that there are 3 kinds of power that exist for every purpose, and they're needed in every purpose. And they are, we eventually called them appreciation, influence, and control. And control is the center of what you do. Influence is outside of what you have control. You have some influence power, but you can't control it. And outside of that, there's another one which you can't control, you can't influence, but you have to appreciate. If you put those three together, you've got 9 types of purpose and power. And what the systems tell us is that no matter what kind of power your organization needs or what kind of power you yourself have, in order to be successful, you need all 9. So in writing your papers, you will need to at least consider or use some type of that power, either in an appreciative way, or to try and influence things in that, or to try and tell people what to do in that control. So you're using 3 kinds of power in your paper. So all 9 papers have all 9 variables inside them, but in a different order. Because as you may notice on this order, I have the way you naturally did it. Papers in this form from paper 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 makes up the order, the natural order of process for producing these papers. But when Gary shared it to you, he shared a map he'd been developing for systems engineering, and his map has a slightly different set of priorities. You'll notice the colors and the number of papers in a different position. In fact, this whole scheme is rotated 90 degrees left in Gary's charts. And that mentioned that third thing we discovered, which is order, is that the order in which you do things, in other words, it's not necessarily sequential order, but order of priority in which you do things matters. So in each of these papers is really at some level covering all the 9 variables, but this first one will cover more the AA, which I say is the appreciative open purpose of it. And Gary gave a wonderful example of what a perfect AA would be in his little video of 145 seconds, which is being open to the whole situation and being open to all the possible methods of doing it. So that first one is to cover everything, whereas then we come down to this paper 8, and if I get my way, that will be paper 9, because I want to put 5 right in the middle here. So I want to put my paper in there, and it'll be position 5. So this will become position 9. And Anand illustrated very well what all the 9 would look like in his paper. So in other words, what I'll be trying to do in this paper is learn your language for each of these papers, so I already know what I have to do. I don't have the language to do it because I need what's in your papers, because I'm in here and connecting with this to get the balance, to see that we're balancing as in terms of social system design, in terms of political system design, in terms of technical system design, and contributing where I can to say, well, have you thought of this? But it won't prevent you from producing your paper, and any of these 9 variables can be in it, but emphasized differently than in the other papers. And so that takes a load off your mind in one sense, that it doesn't matter if there's replication, because you're doing it from a different perspective, And so I think in writing the papers, if that different perspective can come out in the abstract, and if the abstract would be purposely written in a language that is not COVID language, but English language, for everybody, that will serve the broader community who's not the technical, like most of the technical stuff will be in these papers or in these down here, but these ones get more to do, you ask for philosophy. Well, philosophy drives the political column down here. So what I'll be trying to do then is read your papers and understand how these terms translate in there, and then I'll have the words to put in my paper here. But it will be a synthesis of how all of these different interests are balanced socially, politically, and technically. Right.
Brilliant. Thanks, Bill.
Yeah. So let me go.
Right. So I've really got to go in 5 minutes, but how are people feeling? There's just quickly. So Bruce, how are you feeling?
Good. Thank you.
Okay. Felix, how about you? How are you feeling? You're on mute.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm very excited to proceed in writing down something which I have learned today.
Great. Eugenie, how are you?
Well, I'm still grubbing out information at the coalface, and what you've done is proposed a whole Empire State Building of thought. So I will confess to feeling slightly overwhelmed, but I do think that you need the substrate before you can build the towers.
Yes, yeah, we did some foundations, agree. Anand, how are you?
On a high, I want to get this done.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
So you're happy
very
with
hyper about it.
you're happy with a tight deadline then?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you. Very much appreciated. Bevan, how are you?
I'm a bit confused. It's a pity that Jennifer's not here because my understanding was she was putting it together for the journal she's the editor of.
That's right.
Pharmacological Research and Perspectives. And so I think it's important that she says yes or no.
Yes.
In terms of what we're adding to it. So I think we need to clarify with Jenny whether she still wants to run it with that journal or whether she wants something somewhere else.
Yeah, I think it is interesting that at the purpose level, that's one of the really big things to decide, because if this is entirely academic, it may not do the job, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But if you're trying to do what we're trying to do and take a whole systems perspective, which includes social, political, technical, and the other levels of purpose, then that might be more difficult in a purely academic thing. And that's fine. You can do the academic thing, but you can also have, either, you can translate that before it's delivered to an audience that's going to act on it, because there may be an academic audience for it. And then an audience, and I'm saying for here, the purely academic audience won't get global implementation because it won't have, it won't have the political and purpose stuff that it needs.
I agree with that. I'm just wondering, Bevan, whether we at the moment deal with the confines of Jenny's proposition and then build on that to the bigger picture that William and Anand have been sort of introducing us to.
Right.
Because I don't think we could get all this done by the end of June anyway.
No.
And that is
our Jenny papers, and then reuse the material into a bigger production that perhaps we put into more of a lay language.
Yeah.
That really gets out and thumps people with what they need to do and how we're going to take over the world.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I'll try and set up a specific session with Jenny to talk about this to see how we go.
Yeah.
Because in essence, we're really only doing the appreciative side of the problem. We have to, in that, recognize that it's going to have to go down to a region somewhere to be done and sort out all the politics and all the rest of it. And then they are going to have to sort out all the local stuff and all the rest of it. But what you want is a good appreciation of how the whole thing fits together. And that's what we're doing.
Yep. Right. Okay. So I recorded the session, so you know, we can go again through this at our leisure. I think there's a massive amount of information, but thanks again for everybody contributing and for a fascinating discussion. And you know, I think we are on a good track to really do something important with this and influential. So thanks a lot, and I'll see you all again individually or next time. Thanks for everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.